The cold was not a simple temperature. It was an intrusive, metallic companion that had lived in the bones of Silas for as long as he could remember. It tasted of old oil and iron dust, clinging to the inside of his throat even when he swallowed the thin, stale air of the Bus 74. Bus 74 had long ago surrendered its purpose, its vibrant yellow shell muted to a sickly ochre, streaked with monumental veins of deep chemical red rust. It rested, tilted slightly toward the west, deep within the forgotten field known only as the Boneyard, a silent graveyard of retired locomotion surrounded by thorny weeds and chain-link fencing torn by time and negligence. Silas, barely 10 years old, lay curled in the third row, driver's side. This was his sanctuary, his coffin, his world. The seat padding, once thick grey vinyl, was long gone, shredded by years of neglect and by Silas himself, scavenging for materials to plug the gaping holes where windows should have been. Now he slept directly on the hard, curved sheet metal frame, cushioned only by the single, threadbare blanket he called the grey, a gift from a discarded luggage pile months prior. His eyes were open, fixed on the high ceiling of the bus, where a massive patch of ceiling paneling had peeled away, exposing the skeletal ribs and insulation stained the color of old coffee. The morning light, weak and diffuse, struggled to penetrate the filth of the remaining windows, casting the interior in a perpetual, muted twilight. Silas shifted, the movement creating a sharp, protesting screech from the springs still clinging stubbornly to the metal frame beneath him. The sound felt deafening in the profound silence of the Boneyard, a silence broken only by the distant, mournful rush of wind funneling through the bus's long, empty aisle. Hunger was a constant low thrum beneath his ribs, but today another sensation dominated, the crushing, leaden weight of uncertainty. Elias, a boy 2 years his senior, who moved through the Boneyard with the predatory assurance of a fox, had given Silas a deadline. By nightfall, Silas was to relinquish Bus 74. Elias claimed it offered superior protection from the northeastern drafts, and Elias's claim was backed by sheer cold intimidation. Silas traced the outlines of the metal seat with his fingers. He had spent countless hours exploring every square inch of this seat, Seat 5. It was the only part of the world he truly owned. He knew the precise location of the rivet holes, the smooth depressions where generations of children had fidgeted, and the sharp, jagged points where the vinyl had been completely torn away. He needed to focus on something concrete, something small enough to manage. He ran his index finger over a particularly stubborn patch of residue near the upper curve of the seat back. It was not rust, but a hardened, sticky grime, likely decades-old chewing gum mixed with dirt and spilled soda. He often picked at this spot when anxiety coiled too tightly in his chest. He dug his fingernail beneath the crust. It was difficult work. The grime resisted, clinging with the tenacity of dried mortar. He paused, looking around the aisle. His meager collection of possessions, a chipped ceramic mug, 3 stones he liked the shape of, and a bent fork, offered no tools. He reached into his pocket. His pocket was mostly empty, save for the single small, tarnished copper coin he had found cemented into the asphalt outside the Boneyard gate last week. It was his most valuable tool. Silas withdrew the coin. It felt heavy and substantial against the fragile skin of his palm. He positioned the edge of the coin against the stubborn patch of filth on the back of Seat 5. He pressed down firmly, angling the coin slightly, and began to scrape. The sound was immediate and grating, a high-pitched, insistent screech, copper against dried sediment and aging paint. It vibrated up his arm, settling in a sharp, tingling sensation at his elbow. He tried to keep the sound minimized, paranoid that even the slightest noise might carry to Elias's bus, several hundred yards away, signaling occupation and vulnerability. He scraped again, slowly, methodically, focusing all his small strength onto that single square inch of the seat. He felt the texture changing under the coin, the initial gritty resistance giving way to a smoother, slicker surface beneath. Layers of history were peeling back. He repeated the movement, shh, creech, shh, creech. A small pile of dark, dry flakes accumulated in the hollow of the seat. Silas paused, blowing the dust away with a careful puff of air. The effort made his jaw ache. He looked closely at the freshly revealed metal. It was a pale, oxidized grey, distinct from the surrounding orange-red rust. But the surface was not smooth. There were faint, shallow indentations running through the freshly cleaned area. He leaned in closer, his nose almost touching the cold metal. The light was bad, but he could feel the shapes with the pads of his fingertips. They weren't random scratches. They were deliberate marks, etched deeply into the hard surface. He scraped the area immediately surrounding the marks, cleaning a space roughly the size of his hand. As more grime fell away, the indentations became clearer, sharper, revealing the structure of letters. They were not modern, printed letters, but carefully carved script, the handiwork of a bored student with a sharp object and too much time. Silas slowly traced the first letter with his fingertip. It felt like a deep valley carved into the metal plateau. A capital A. He moved to the next mark. A long vertical line, two curves, an R. His breath hitched slightly, an involuntary physical reaction to the sudden, focused discovery. This was not random vandalism, this was someone leaving their name. He continued tracing, A-A-R-O-N, a single space, and then a capital K. The name was simple, familiar, yet utterly alien in the context of Silas's existence. He had never considered that the bus had a history beyond its decay, that people had once lived within its walls, riding it daily, taking it for granted. Aaron K. The name felt solid, an anchor in the floating despair of his life. He stared at it, the copper coin still clutched in his hand. He scraped a little more, just below the finished name, wanting to clean the entire slate of the seat back. As he dragged the coin across the lower section, the shh-creech sound abruptly changed. It became a dull, heavier thunk, a sound of metal hitting something softer, perhaps wood or plastic, hidden within the structure of the seat frame. Silas froze, his heart beginning a quick, uneven rhythm against his ribs. The dramatic urgency that Elias's threat had instilled returned, magnified by the sudden shift in the environment. Was it a trap? A rat? Or something left behind? He ran the coin over the spot again. Thunk, thunk, definitely hollow beneath the surface, and something was rattling inside. He dropped the coin onto the seat and used both hands to pull at the edge of the remaining vinyl surrounding the spot. The vinyl, though brittle, refused to budge. He pushed the material inward, exploring the space between the metal frame and the covering. His fingers encountered a gap. It was narrow, just wide enough for the edge of the coin. Retrieving the copper piece, Silas carefully wedged its sharp edge into the seam. He pushed. The old material groaned, protesting the invasion. He pushed harder, leveraging the curve of the seat. With a sudden, tearing sound, the harsh rip of aging adhesive giving way, a narrow strip of the vinyl tore free, exposing a dark crevice in the metal frame that housed the seat cushion. The space was dusty and tight, but he could see something lodged deep within the cavity. It was small, wrapped in what looked like faded brown cellophane or thin, brittle plastic. Silas dropped the coin and used the tips of his fingers to try and snag the object. The metal edges of the frame were sharp, slicing a fine, stinging line across his knuckle. He ignored the pain, his focus absolute. He maneuvered his hand carefully, feeling the fragile wrapper tear slightly as he pulled. Slowly, agonizingly, the object was drawn out of its dusty tomb. It was not gold, or money, or a weapon. It was a piece of cardboard, roughly 2 inches by 3 inches, protected by the fragile, yellowed cellophane. It was a photograph. Silas held it carefully, tilting it toward the weak morning light filtering through the bus windows. The wrapper crackled slightly, threatening to crumble entirely. The image was worn, the colors faded to sepia tones, but the subject was startlingly clear. It showed two figures. On the left, a boy who looked slightly younger than Silas, perhaps 8, with wide, earnest eyes and a slightly too large jacket. His hair was thick and dark. This must be Aaron Kay. Beside the boy stood a man. He was tall, dressed in simple, functional work clothes, a faded blue shirt and dark trousers. The man was smiling, a genuine, strong smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. His hand rested heavily, comfortably, on the boy's shoulder. The image radiated a palpable sense of warmth, security, and belonging that felt like a painful physical blow to Silas. Aaron Kay had a father, or a guardian, someone who smiled at him like that. Silas turned the photo over, his fingers trembling slightly. The back was plain white cardboard, but near the bottom edge, faded handwriting scrawled in thin purple ink confirmed the identity. Aaron and Dad. Stop 9. 98. The realization settled heavily in Silas's chest. The bus was not just an empty vessel, it was a ghost of routine, a moving sanctuary that carried people to places and from people who cared. Aaron Kay had ridden this very seat, etching his name, perhaps leaving this photo behind deliberately, a physical bookmark of a happy life. The year 1998 meant the photograph was ancient history to Silas, 2 years before he was even born. Yet the emotion captured was immediate. Silas carefully tucked the photograph into the breast pocket of his thin, oversized jacket, the pocket closest to the dull ache in his chest. He needed context. He needed to know what Stop 9 meant. Did it still exist? Could it lead to something real, something solid that could counter Elias's growing threat? He looked around Bus 74 with fresh eyes. It wasn't just a shelter. It was a clue. He remembered seeing something years ago, tucked beneath the floor paneling near the driver's seat, something rectangular and heavy that he had previously dismissed as worthless paperwork. He had only been 6 then, more interested in scrounging for discarded bottle caps. Now the stakes were too high for dismissal. Silas slid off seat 5, his bare feet sinking slightly into the thick dust, coating the rubberized floor. He moved down the narrow aisle toward the front of the bus, stepping over the jagged edges of torn seats. The driver's area was the most vandalized section. The steering wheel was gone, likely salvaged for scrap years ago. The dashboard was cracked and sun-warped. He knelt stiffly, the cold penetrating his thin trousers instantly. He used the edge of the copper coin to pry up the loose corner of a rubber mat near where the brake pedal used to be. The mat peeled back with a rubbery, unpleasant suction sound. Beneath the mat, the floor paneling was corroded. He ran his hand along the seam where the metal plating met the main chassis. There, tucked deeply into a narrow gap, was a thick, rectangular packet, wrapped tightly in rubber bands that had long since cracked and disintegrated. He pulled the packet out. It was a block of papers, heavy with moisture damage and age. The outside sheets were fused together, stained with blotches of black mold and oil. He carefully peeled back the top layers, which tore and crumbled into damp dust in his hands. He was looking for clarity, for readable text. 2 layers down, he found what appeared to be a relatively protected sheet. It was stiff, yellowed paper, covered in columns of fading black ink. The title, barely legible at the top, read, Oak Haven School District, Route 74 Daily Manifest. Silas's hands trembled with anticipation and the chill of the paper itself. This was the logistical heart of the bus, the map of its former life. He held the manifest steady, squinting at the dense columns. The names were listed alphabetically by stop number. He scanned the lists, moving his finger down the column of names assigned to Route 74. The names were ordinary: Smith, Thomas, Jensen, Miller. He stopped breathing when his finger hit Stop 9. Stop 9, Oakhaven Street in Cyprus. Below the street address, K. Aaron. The details clicked into place with devastating clarity. Aaron K., 3rd grade, rode seat 5 every day, got off at stop 9, and went home to the man in the picture. The evidence of a life lived, a route followed, was undeniable, etched not just on the seat but documented on this decaying paper. Silas clutched the manifest tightly. The paper felt brittle and precious. This was not just a map to Aaron's past. It was a potential map to his own future. Stop 9, Oakhaven Street and Cyprus, a place outside the Boneyard, a named location in the real world. The sound of heavy, deliberate footsteps crunching on the gravel outside the bus instantly shattered the concentration. Silas instinctively shoved the manifest deep into his jacket, layering it over the photograph. He scrambled back to seat 5, flattening himself against the rusty metal, trying to become invisible. Elias. He was early. The deadline was hours away, but Elias rarely respected boundaries, time, or rules. A large, hulking shadow darkened the gaping entrance where the main door had been ripped off. Elias was 12, thick-limbed, and possessed a perpetual scowl that made his face look older than his years. He wore a heavy, stained canvas coat and thick boots that sounded like stones grinding together whenever he moved. Elias stopped just inside the entrance, letting his eyes adjust to the low light. "Silas!" Elias's voice was low and gravelly, carrying the distinct threat of casual power. "Still here, then?" Silas remained motionless, his spine pressed painfully against the etched name, Aaron K. He kept his breathing shallow. He dared not speak. Talking meant acknowledging the negotiation was still open, which it was not. "I said nightfall," Elias continued, stepping 1 foot onto the lower step. The bus groaned slightly under his weight. "But I decided I don't want to wait. The wind is picking up and my current spot is leaking." Elias took another step, entering the aisle. He moved with slow, imposing confidence, his eyes sweeping the meager space. "You got your little box of rocks?" Elias gestured dismissively toward Silas's small pile of items. "Pack them up? 5 minutes?" Silas finally found his voice, a ragged whisper thick with anxiety. "Elias, it's not nightfall yet. You said—" "I changed my mind, Silas. The bus is mine now. You can have the old trailer down by the fence. It leaks worse, but you're smaller." Elias paused, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the aisle again. "What's that smell? Did you light a fire in here?" "No," Silas managed, the lie tasting bitter. He knew the smell. It was the sharp metallic tang of the fresh scar on his knuckle, mixed with the mildewy scent of the newly disturbed manifest. Elias advanced, stopping right next to Silas's seat. His shadow enveloped the boy. "Move!" Elias commanded, his voice hardening. Silas's mind raced. He could beg. He could try to fight, a futile gesture that would only result in pain. Or he could use the evidence pressed against his chest, the knowledge of a real place, a destination. He realized the absurdity of the situation. He was about to be evicted from a rusting hulk based on brute strength, while he held tangible proof of a life lived outside the Boneyard. The urgency was no longer about keeping the bus, but about surviving beyond it. He needed to buy time, just enough time to process the significance of the photograph and the manifest, to commit the address to memory. "Elias," Silas spoke, his voice surprisingly steady, powered by a sudden protective surge over the fragile documents hidden beneath his jacket. "This bus, it belongs to someone." Elias snorted, a harsh, dismissive sound. "Everything here belongs to the Boneyard, which means everything here belongs to me. Get up." "No, listen," Silas pleaded, holding eye contact, forcing himself not to shrink away. "I found something. An old name. Aaron K. He was a student on this route. He used to sit here." Silas tapped the metal seat surface lightly, directly above the etched name. Elias looked down, uninterested. "So, kids carve their names, doesn't make it a monument." "But I found his stop." Silas pressed, the urgency mounting. "Stop 9, Oakhaven Street and Cypress. It's written down. That means this bus wasn't just junk. It had a destination. People went home from here." Elias looked genuinely puzzled by this shift in focus. He expected negotiation about blankets or food, not historical geography. "Are you trying to tell me a ghost student is coming back for this piece of scrap metal?" Elias scoffed. "No," Silas said firmly. "I'm saying there's a place that used to expect someone from this bus. A real house, a family. It's a route. This bus might be dead, Elias, but the route isn't. The outside world is still going to those stops." Silas pulled his hand away from the seat and sat up straight. The intense focus on his internal survival mechanisms had overridden his usual fear. "I don't care about Aaron Kay or his daddy," Elias growled, bending slightly, his shadow overwhelming Silas entirely. "I care about the drafts. You are taking up prime space. Get out." Elias reached out, his thick fingers grabbing Silas's collar. The sudden physical contact sent a jolt of panic through Silas, but it was quickly replaced by a fierce resolve. He couldn't let Elias discover the manifest and the photograph, or he would lose the last vestige of hope. Silas pulled hard against the grip, slipping slightly out of his jacket, which was already too loose. The movement caused the copper coin to fall out of his pocket and clatter onto the floor, rolling slightly before settling against the nearest seat leg. Elias released the collar and looked down at the coin. "You fighting me over a worthless penny now?" "It's not worthless," Silas whispered, his eyes locked on Elias. "It's how I found the name." Silas knew he couldn't stall any longer. Elias was losing patience. If he stayed, he risked a painful beating and the loss of the documents. If he left, he lost his only shelter, but he kept the key. "I'm going," Silas stated clearly, pushing himself up to stand on the cold floor. He quickly gathered his 3 smooth stones and the bent fork, stuffing them into his back pocket. He left the threadbare blanket, the grey, deliberately on the seat. It was a gesture of surrender, confirming the bus was relinquished and hopefully preventing Elias from searching for hidden valuables. Elias watched him, suspicious but satisfied. "Good, don't come back. The Boneyard only has room for those who stay put." Silas turned, taking one last long look down the aisle of bus 74, the dark, rusty interior that had been his world for 4 long years. The etched name, Aaron Kay, was the last thing he saw before he turned his back on the seat. He walked past Elias, forcing himself not to look at the older boy. The air outside the bus entrance felt suddenly frigid, sharp against his exposed skin. He stepped onto the gravel path and began to walk, not toward the flimsy, leaking trailer Elias had offered, but toward the perimeter fence, toward the way out. He kept his stride steady, refusing to look back. The weight of the manifest and the photograph in his breast pocket felt significant, heavier than any gold. It was the weight of a directed purpose. He reached the section of the fence where the chain links were peeled back enough to allow a small person to squeeze through. He didn't hesitate. He maneuvered his body through the gap, the sharp metal scraping against his side, drawing a thin line of red on his jacket. He was out. He was standing on the shoulder of a service road, overlooking the Boneyard. The sun was setting now, turning the sky a deep, urgent shade of bruised purple and orange, fitting the dramatic shift in his life. He walked quickly down the shoulder of the road, moving away from the desolation. He had no plan for food, no plan for shelter for the coming night, but he had an address. He pulled the manifest and the photo out when he was far enough away that the Boneyard was just a cluster of dark, indistinct shapes on the horizon. He needed to verify the information again, commit it to the desperate filing cabinet of his memory. Stop 9, Oakhaven Street and Cypress. He recognized the name Oakhaven. It was the town he had always been near, the cluster of lights visible on clear nights, the place that felt impossibly far away. He knew it was west. He checked the photograph one more time. He looked intently at the background detail behind Aaron and his father. It was blurry, but distinct, a large, sprawling tree with heavy, drooping branches and a white picket fence partially visible behind the man's shoulder. This was the destination. This was where the route ended. Silas began to walk, turning west, toward the faint glow of the town lights that promised Oakhaven. His pace was determined, fueled by the cold fear of the night and the fragile hope clutched in his hands. The journey was long and silent. The urgency of his eviction propelled him forward, turning the cold ache in his muscles into a necessary burn. He walked for hours, sticking close to the shadows of the roadside trees, avoiding the infrequent rushing headlights of passing cars. When the streetlights began to appear more frequently, casting pools of weak yellow light, Silas knew he was nearing Oakhaven proper. The air began to smell different, not of rust and oil, but of damp earth and the distant woodsy scent of burning fireplace logs. He found a park bench tucked under the dense canopy of an old oak tree just outside the main residential area. He sat, huddling against the mounting cold. He had to wait for dawn. Navigating strange streets in the dark was too dangerous. He pulled out the manifest again, the paper feeling colder than the air. He needed the specific route details. He scanned the columns of faded ink, using the light from a distant street lamp. The manifest didn't just list stops, it listed the order of the stops. Stop 1, Main Street Plaza. Stop 2, Library Corner. Stop 3, Elmwood Drive. Stop 9, Oakhaven Street and Cypress. He realized he needed to find the actual streets. As the first faint grey light of dawn began to bleed into the eastern sky, Silas rose. His body protested, stiff and chilled to the bone, but the internal clock of urgency drove him onward. He walked into the residential grid of Oakhaven. The streets were lined with neat small houses, each one radiating a sense of secure warmth he had never known. The sight was overwhelming. The sheer normalcy of it felt like a fantasy. He saw a large green sign at an intersection, Maple Avenue. He consulted the manifest in his mind. He needed Oakhaven Street. He walked for another half hour, the town slowly coming to life around him. The sounds were alien, the gentle clatter of a newspaper delivery, the distant steady hum of a furnace, the chirp of early morning birds. Silas stopped, scanning the area. The street was wide, lined with trees whose leaves were mostly gone, leaving only stark, skeletal branches. He walked the length of Oakhaven Street, counting the intersecting lanes. He was looking for Cypress. The number 9 stop implied a location deep within the route. He passed Juniper, he passed Pine, he passed Willow. He was beginning to fear the street had changed its name, or that the manifest was too old to be useful. The sun was now fully up, though weak, and the cold was turning into a dry, abrasive chill. Then he saw the sign, Oakhaven Street and Cypress Lane. Silas stepped onto the corner, his heart pounding a slow, deliberate rhythm that matched the ticking urgency in his ears. This was it. Stop. 9. He looked around, scanning the houses on all 4 corners. Which house belonged to Aaron Kay? He remembered the photograph, the large, sprawling tree and the white picket fence. He looked directly across the intersection. There, set back from the road, was an older, well-maintained 2-story house. And dominating the front lawn, casting a wide, protective shadow even in winter, was an enormous, ancient oak tree, its branches drooping low enough to brush the roof. And yes, running along the front yard, perfectly visible, was a low white picket fence, needing a fresh coat of paint, but solid and intact. This was it. The place Aaron Kay had returned to every day. Silas felt a wave of dizziness, the culmination of cold, hunger, and profound emotional realization. He was standing on the precise spot where a school bus had stopped decades ago, disgorging a boy into a waiting, safe life. He walked slowly across Cypress Lane, approaching the curb outside the house. He dared not step onto the lawn. He stopped at the edge of the sidewalk, clutching the photograph tightly. He stared at the house, It was quiet. The curtains were drawn on the ground floor windows. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney. The normalcy was staggering. He wondered what he was supposed to do now. He had found the destination, but the destination was empty of answers for him. Aaron Kay and his father were long gone, replaced by the silence of the present residents. Silas stood there for a long time, the cold seeping up from the concrete and into his feet. He felt a profound sense of failure mixed with discovery. The name on the seat had led him here, out of the Boneyard, away from Elias, but it hadn't given him a home. He slowly pulled the manifest from his pocket. The paper was stiff and delicate. He looked at the address one last time, engraving the street names and the number 9 into his memory. Then deliberately, he began to tear the manifest into small, neat pieces. The paper was too dangerous to carry. It was evidence of trespassing and knowledge he shouldn't possess. He was cutting the cord to the bus 74 and its decaying past. The name and the address were now internalized. He placed the torn pieces into his jacket pocket, intending to scatter them later where the wind would take them, leaving no trace. He kept only the photograph. He was about to turn and walk away when he heard a sound, a quiet mechanical rumble from the driveway next door. A garage door was slowly rising, revealing the dark opening. Silas froze, instinctively stepping back into the shadow of the great oak tree. A large, older man, dressed in a thick flannel jacket, backed a pickup truck out of the garage. Silas watched, barely breathing. The man stopped the truck at the curb, put it in park and climbed out. He walked around to the passenger side and opened the door. He reached inside and carefully lifted out a boy. The boy looked about the same age as Silas, perhaps 10. He had bright, dark eyes and a thick mop of dark hair. He was wearing a slightly too large jacket. He looked surprisingly familiar. The man helped the boy, who moved with a slight, deliberate stiffness onto the sidewalk. The man then bent down, reaching back into the truck for a folded metal apparatus, a wheelchair. Silas watched, rooted to the spot. The boy was disabled, needing assistance to move. The man unfolded the chair with quick, practiced movements and guided the boy into the seat. He secured a blanket around the boy's legs. "Cold morning, Danny," the man said, his voice deep but kind. "We'll be quick." "Okay, Dad," the boy, Danny, replied, his voice thin and slightly nasal. Danny's father started pushing the chair toward the street. They were going to the corner. "Stop, 9." Silas watched them approach the intersection, the father's hand resting protectively on the back of the wheelchair. Then the true impact of the photograph hit Silas with crushing force. It wasn't just the familiarity of the scene, a boy and his father safe and directed. It was the physical details of the man. The way his work clothes hung, the thickness of his hands, the slight, unique tilt of his head as he looked down at the boy. Silas stared at the man's face, tracing the lines of age and care. He slowly, meticulously, pulled the photograph back out of his pocket. He held it side by side with the living scene unfolding 20 feet away. The man in the flannel jacket helping the boy was older, grayer, with deeper lines around his eyes. But it was undeniably the same man from the photograph. The same strong, kind smile. But the boy in the wheelchair was not Aaron Kay. Aaron Kay had been 8 in the photo. This boy was 10. Aaron Kay had been healthy and standing. Silas felt a profound, aching confusion. If that was Aaron's father, where was Aaron? The man and Danny reached the corner. They stopped, waiting patiently. Silas realized they were waiting for the school bus. He watched the street. Moments later, a modern, bright yellow school bus, clean and powerful, rounded the corner. It slowed down and activated its flashing lights. The bus number, painted in bold black numbers above the windshield, was 74, the modern Route 74. The route was not dead. It had just been upgraded. Silas watched as the bus came to a smooth stop right where he stood hours ago, at the exact coordinates of stop 9. The driver opened the door. The man skillfully pushed Danny up the ramp lift. Silas, still hidden in the shadow of the oak tree, lowered the photograph. He had to speak, to know. He couldn't leave this moment suspended in unresolved history. He took 2 deliberate steps out of the shadow and onto the curb, revealing himself. The driver was busy securing the wheelchair. Danny was looking out the window, his eyes wide. The father, turning to walk away from the bus, saw Silas. The man stopped instantly, his expression shifting from patient focus to startled curiosity. He took in Silas's appearance, the thin, dusty jacket, the desperate exhaustion in his eyes, the absolute stillness. Silas didn't say a word. He simply raised his hand, holding out the faded photograph toward the man. The man, drawn by the boy's silent intensity, walked slowly toward Silas. He stopped a few feet away, his expression cautious. "Son, are you lost?" the man asked, his voice softer now. Silas could barely hear him over the idling rumble of the Bus 74 engine. He shook his head slightly, pushing the photo forward, offering it as evidence. The man took the fragile cardstock gently, holding it with 2 fingers. He looked down at the image of his younger self, beaming proudly next to a healthy young boy. His face crumbled instantly, the strong lines around his eyes deepening as emotion flooded them. He recognized the photo instantly. "Aaron," the man whispered, his voice thick with pain and memory. He looked up at Silas, a question burning in his eyes. "Where did you get this?" Silas pointed a shaking finger over his shoulder, toward the distant edge of town, toward the location he had just escaped. "Bus 74, Silas managed, the words catching in his dry throat. "The old one. In the Boneyard. It was hidden in the back of seat 5. The man stared at the photo, then back at Silas, connecting the impossible dots. The lost piece of history, surfacing decades later, delivered by a child who looked like he had barely survived. "Aaron carved his name there," the man said, a faint, sad smile touching his lips. "He was so proud of that seat, his favorite spot." The school bus door hissed shut, and the modern Route 74 pulled away, disappearing around the corner, carrying Danny to school. Silas stood, his body vibrating with cold and the unbearable tension of the encounter. He waited for the man to ask him to leave, to dismiss him as a thief or a stray. Instead, the man sighed heavily, tucking the photograph into his jacket pocket, exactly where Silas had kept it. "My name is Michael," the man said, his eyes now serious, searching Silas's face. "Aaron was my son. He passed away shortly after this photo was taken. A sudden illness. We lost him 25 years ago. I kept his name on the manifest for weeks after, just couldn't bear to erase it." The gravity of the confession hung heavy in the cold air. Silas felt a fresh, stinging wave of grief, not his own, but the echo of the man's deep, long-held sorrow. Aaron Kay hadn't just moved away. He had died, leaving behind only the ghost of his name and a moment of joy captured on cardboard. Silas looked down at his own worn boots. The name hadn't been a clue to a future home, but a painful memorial to a life cut short. "I'm Silas," he whispered, finally giving his own name to someone outside the Boneyard. Michael, Aaron's father, knelt down slowly, bringing himself closer to Silas's level. The gesture was one of respect, not power. "Silas," Michael repeated, testing the name. "You left your shelter, everything you know, to bring this back." Silas shook his head. "No, I was forced out. Elias took the bus. I used the name. I found the address on the old route manifest. I needed to know if it was real, if people really lived like this." He gestured vaguely toward the warm house, the picket fence. Michael's eyes softened, recognizing the desperation beneath the curiosity. He saw the cold, the hunger, the naked vulnerability of a boy who had been living on the residue of a forgotten past. "It's real, Silas," Michael said quietly. It was real for Aaron. It's real for Danny now. He paused, looking at his house, then back at Silas. And I think Aaron left this for a reason. Maybe not for me, but for the next boy who sat in that empty seat. Michael stood up slowly, reaching into his pocket again. He didn't pull out the photograph, but his wallet. He opened it, revealing the meager cash he carried. Silas steeled himself for the usual offer, a few dollars, a sandwich, a quick dismissal. Instead, Michael closed the wallet and placed a strong, warm hand on Silas's shoulder. The weight was comforting, grounding. Silas, you found this photograph because you were looking for a connection. You were looking for a route home, and that route led you to my door today, right after you lost the only safe place you had. Michael's gaze was unflinching. This house is real. My life is real. And I think I owe the boy who brought back my son's memory more than a few dollars. He looked toward his own front door. My wife, Eleanor, is inside. She keeps the coffee warm and the stove burning. Aaron, he would have wanted someone to inherit that seat, not the metal one in the bus, but the one at our table. Silas felt a massive tectonic shift in his entire existence. The cold, the terror, the hunger, it all receded, replaced by a surge of heat and an overwhelming sense of disbelief. The world was offering him a chair, a table, and a connection. I can't, Silas stammered, his defense mechanisms kicking in. I don't belong here. I'm just a boy from the Boneyard. Nonsense, Michael said, the slight smile returning. Aaron's legacy led you here, Silas. That bus seat was a tomb for 25 years until you found the life underneath the grime. You are not a boy from the Boneyard. You are the boy who brought Aaron home. Michael stepped back, pulling out a key from his pocket, a simple brass house key. He placed it directly into Silas's cold, trembling hand. The cold metal of the key felt impossibly heavy, a massive responsibility. Walk with me, Silas. Just walk through that gate where Aaron walked every day. We'll figure the rest out inside. We have spare rooms and we have time. Silas looked down at the key, then at the house, then back at Michael's face, a face carved by sorrow and now surprisingly radiating a quiet, determined hope. He looked at the white picket fence. He looked at the great protective oak tree. He took a deep breath, the air no longer tasting of rust but of chimney smoke and the promise of warmth. Silas took his first step toward the house, walking the final distance of Route 74, Stop 9, guided by the ghost of a name and the unexpected kindness of a grieving father. He stepped onto the clean pavement of the driveway, his heart echoing the satisfying emotional closure of the long journey. The rusty bus was far behind him, replaced by a structure of wood, warmth, and the heavy, tangible reality of belonging. The simple name, Aaron Kay, etched into the metal of a forgotten seat, had done what no amount of dreaming ever could. It had changed his entire life by giving him a route home.